Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everybody. I hope you've had a productive week. I wish you a restful weekend ahead. Today we begin with China's industrial policy. This week US-based The New York Times published a piece called How China Rose to Lead the World in Cars and Solar Panels. The article provides a nice, succinct breakdown of the basics of China's industrial policy generally, and in EVs and solar panels specifically. These are the very industries which the EU and US and others are pushing back against now with protectionist measures. We'll move through some of the points made in the article, which I have supplemented with additional salient points and information. It begins with financial repression. Regulators restrict the investment options of Chinese households, which have little choice but to deposit enormous sums of money into banks at low interest rates. The Chinese control most of the banks, either directly through state ownership or indirectly through the regulatory regime. The banks then lend the money at low interest rates to startups and other businesses. According to China's central bank, net lending for industry swelled to $670 billion last year from $83 billion in 2019. Beijing instructs local governments to help strategically selected industries. The assistance takes the form of cheap land for factories, new highways for freight trucks, bullet train lines, and other infrastructure. Indeed, for many years, it was pumped into infrastructure, which was seen as a safe bet to guarantee jobs and minimum levels of growth. The Kehl Institute for the World Economy in Germany calculated in a study that more than 99% of Chinese companies whose stock traded publicly received direct government subsidies in 2022. China keeps factory wages low as well, which helps the competitiveness of its manufacturers. Resident permits limit the ability of rural families to move permanently to cities, where they would qualify for better job benefits. Independent labor unions are banned, and would-be organizers are detained by police. So we can see the systematic forced transfer of capital from households into industry. As such, households do not have the levels of consumption sufficient to buy what is made, so these products are sold on global markets, especially to nations like the US, with strong, robust consumption and relatively open markets. There is another component as well. By 2011, Beijing had begun requiring Western companies to transfer key technologies to operations in China if they wanted consumers in China to receive the same subsidies for imported electric cars that were being offered for cars made in China. Without the subsidies, automakers like General Motors and Ford Motor could not compete with electric cars made in China. So, in order to be treated equally, these leading car makers had to hand over key technologies. These companies complained and turned to their governments at the time, but back in 2011, there wasn't a political will to challenge Chinese industrial policy. The zeitgeist was much different then than it is today. Then in 2016, Beijing declared that even electric cars made in China would qualify for consumer subsidies only if they used batteries from factories owned by Chinese companies. Chinese companies thus enjoyed massive state support and technology transfer, while foreign companies were pressured with protectionist measures and had to hand over technology. Chinese companies now produce the majority of the world's electric car batteries. According to a new report from the Atlantic Council, a research group in Washington, China's exports of lithium-ion batteries leaped to $65 billion last year from $13 billion in 2019. Nearly 2/3 of these exports went to Europe and North America. This imbalance exists in other sectors too. For example, this week, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin reports that in China, domestic demand for wind power turbines has plummeted since 2021, when the government completely wound down national-level subsidies for new wind projects. Quote, "This led to a plunge in demand and created massive oversupply, particularly in the offshore wind sector. China's annual offshore wind turbine production capacity amounts to about 15 gigawatts, but in 2022 only 5 gigawatts were actually installed. In 2023, installations were about 7 gigawatts, still less than half of the production capacity that year." End quote. This has driven prices through the floor. The average bid for onshore wind turbine projects fell by half to around 1,500 yuan, $207 per kilowatt, from 3,000 yuan in early 2021. To make up for the shortfall, producers are sending this capacity overseas. On the 9th of April, the European Commission announced it had launched a probe into Chinese wind turbine suppliers for alleged overcapacity. And this week, on Tuesday, the Biden administration announced steep tariff hikes targeting a short list of strategic imports from China, covering steel and aluminium, semiconductors, electric vehicles, batteries, critical minerals, solar cells, ship-to-shore cranes, and medical products. As regular viewers know, however, despite both the US, the EU, and others communicating to the Chinese that overcapacity has become a major economic concern and source of tension in the relationship, Beijing, on multiple occasions, has pushed back hard against the accusations, saying that overcapacity is simply a new form of the China threat theory. As such, we should expect this global trade war to only escalate. Next up, the UK-China relationship is becoming increasingly shaky as Beijing pushes back hard against British arrests of suspected Chinese agents and spies this week, as well as new allegations from the UK that China is engaging in cyber attacks, espionage, and the issuing of bounties in Britain. China's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Zheng, met with relevant UK Foreign Office officials on Tuesday and told the UK side, quote, not to go further down the dangerous path of jeopardizing China-UK relations, end quote. During the meeting, Zheng made further serious representations to the UK side on its, quote, wrongful behaviour, including its unwarranted accusation against the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government, and refuted the excuses made by the UK side, end quote. The ambassador, quote, was unequivocal that the UK must stop anti-China political manoeuvring and not go further down the dangerous path of hurting China-UK relations, end quote. State media Xinhua the same day reported, quote, the UK fabricated on Monday the so-called case to smear and attack the Hong Kong government. For some time now, the UK has staged a series of accusations against China, including those of China spies and cyber attacks. All those accusations are groundless and slanderous, end quote. The Monday comments referred to here are from the Director of Britain's Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, who told a security conference in the central English city of Birmingham, quote, China poses a genuine and increasing cyber risk to the UK, end quote, and that Beijing's cyber capabilities are, quote, world-class, end quote. US National Cyber Director Harry Coker told the conference that Chinese military hackers were circumventing US defenses in cyberspace and targeting US interests at, quote, an unprecedented scale, end quote, adding, quote, in a crisis or conflict scenario, China could use their pre-positioned cyber capabilities to wreak havoc in civilian infrastructure and deter US military action, end quote. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the same day that Britain faced a threat from, quote, an axis of authoritarian states like Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China, end quote. The Huawei CFO arrest in Canada saga taught the world that China has become much more confident in throwing its weight around with middle powers. In the current zeitgeist too, Beijing has an especially bitter view of Anglophone countries. Next up, we move from tensions with the UK to tensions in the Taiwan Strait. But just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button. Sharing and subscribing is also a big help. And for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable, I rely primarily on your support to keep going. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Next up, the 20th of May will see the inauguration of William Lai as Taiwan's next president. As this day approaches, we've been seeing analyses predicting escalating tensions and potential conflict on the horizon, even warnings of war. Tensions across the Strait are indeed at historic heights. Beijing has made it clear that they see Lai as a separatist. Taiwan reported Chinese forces carrying out another combat patrol near the island on Tuesday, including several aircraft across the Taiwan Strait's sensitive median line. Yet, despite all this, we should manage expectations. There are no signs of imminent conflict over Taiwan, as Ryan Hass, director of the John L. Thornton China Center, writes in a US-based Brookings piece this week, quote, such analysis is easy to write and almost certainly wrong. Lai is not a wild-eyed zealot with a one-track-minded focus on Taiwan independence. He is a professional politician who has organized his career around becoming Taiwan's president. Now that he has ascended to Taiwan's top elected position, he will want to win re-election. To do so, he almost certainly will need to move to the center of Taiwan's political spectrum rather than cater to the wishes of a small minority of Taiwan voters who favor throwing caution to the wind in service of Taiwan independence or unification. Indeed, less than 6% of Taiwan's voters support the imminent pursuit of independence from or unification with the People's Republic of China. The Taiwan people elected Lai with a weak mandate. China likely also will increase military pressure on Taiwan in the coming years. China clearly is investing significant resources in military operations for resolving cross-strait differences. China's expanding military capabilities will be felt most acutely in Taiwan. Even so, the United States government continues to assess that conflict in the Taiwan Strait is neither imminent nor inevitable. End quote. Still, we should expect Beijing to ramp up pressure during the Lai administration, and not just on Taipei. South Korea-based The Korea Times reports this week that China has confirmed that Premier Li Qiang will participate in the Korea-China-Japan Trilateral Summit at the end of the month. Quote, but whether China would agree to bilateral talks with Korea during the summit hinges on whether Korea will honor its commitment not to send a delegation for the inauguration of Taiwan's new leader, according to a source with connections with top Chinese officials. End quote. Wu Su-Kwan, chairman of the Seoul-based Korea-China Global Association, said that during his recent visit to mainland China last month, it was disclosed in private discussions with high-ranking Chinese officials from the General Office of the Chinese Communist Party and the State Council that bilateral talks depend solely on Korea's stance regarding Taiwan. Washington is quietly preparing too. This week, in an exclusive, UK-based Reuters reports that the US and Taiwan navies quietly held Pacific drills in April. One source said, quote, multiple military assets were involved, end quote. A second source said the drills did not officially exist and were dubbed unplanned sea encounters, pointing to a tacit agreement in which both sides claimed the exercises were simply the result of coincidental encounters. One source told the outlet, quote, it's like I'm dining in this restaurant and you also happen to be there. Then it looks like I am only sharing the same table with someone, end quote. That source also said that half a dozen Navy ships from both sides, including frigates and supply and support vessels, participated in the days-long exercises, which were designed to practice basic operations such as communications, refueling, and resupply. So, while war does not appear imminent, both sides are very much preparing for it. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a great Friday, and I will see you all tomorrow.